Hi, everyone. Good morning. Good morning. You see, now we've been sitting here so long, I think it's morning already. I apologize for this technical difficulty that we've been having today. The streaming has been quite challenging, but I want to thank our guests for their patience. And so we're going to get started. My name is Marbella Muro. I'm the Director of Artistic Programs and Education at Self-Help Graphics. I want to welcome everyone to the Artist Lab in the Studio series, which supports and promotes artists of color and seeks to maintain the creative community connected during this time of isolation and to reflect on our shared experience. So before moving forward, we want to acknowledge that Self-Help Graphics resides in the Apachagna, currently known as the Los Angeles neighborhood of Boyle Heights, where the original peoples of this territory, the Tongva, Chumash, and Tataviam, were first displaced. So for tonight's topic, we will focus on the youth experience in this time of civil unrest, looking at our history to better understand our future. On Saturday, August 29th, we celebrated and honored the Chicano moratorium's 50th anniversary. And for those present and for those who were not, we have seen images of people marching down the streets, hand in hand, fist in the air. Some people smile with excitement and optimism, while others with anger, unanimously chanting and demanding justice and reform. But we have also seen images of some experienced the militaristic approach to silence the demonstrators. The Chicano moratorium, inspired by the civil rights movement, empowered and advocated for the Chicano, Chicana, Chicanx rights, and 50 years to the future, the country is reliving this experience. Peaceful demonstrators severely hurt and some killed, practicing their constitutional right. The Black Lives Matter movement, whose mission is to eradicate white supremacy and to build local power to intervene in violence inflicted on Black communities, resonates with the Chicano moratorium's values and the current fight for the systemic change and justice for the communities of color. So I'm excited to host three special guests. First, we have legendary Chicano essayist, photographer, director, and performance artist, Harry Gamboa Jr. He will be in conversation with Oscar Dominguez, pronounced he, him, his, and Arlene Campa, pronounced they, them, theirs, both former members of Self-Help Graphics Youth Committee. Oscar is a Mexican Salvadorian descent. He's a community organizer, an independent filmmaker, and an actor. He graduated from UC Santa Barbara with a BA in communications. Sorry, I lost you. I'm sorry, I lost my place here. Sorry about that. So he graduated from UC Santa Barbara with a BA in communications and has been involved with organizations such as the El Salvador Corridor Community Campaign, the Central American International Film Festival, founded by his father, and as an organizer in political campaigns. He is currently a youth organizer for Legacy LA here in Boyle Heights. And Arlene Campa is a senior at LACSA, the Los Angeles County High School of the Arts. They are an artist, community organizer, and the first Latinx Los Angeles Youth Poet Laureate. They are also founder of the Art Hour, a student-run organization on a mission to alleviate art inequities in schools by providing free virtual 1-hour art lessons to students in grades K to 12. So Harry, we'll begin the conversation with you to discuss briefly the events and issues that led to the Chicano moratorium. However, for tonight, we want to learn more about how you and your peers as high school students and even later experienced the walkouts and talk about the environment and what you guys were, you and your peers were talking about. And on the other side, we'd like to hear about Oscar and Arlene's experience and perspectives of the layered obstacles that are facing our communities of color today. They both have prepared questions to ask each other in hopes that we can learn from the past to better understand what we're experiencing today and what we need to change to eliminate the systems that allow police brutality, to eliminate the systems that allow police brutality and to begin to establish policies with a lens of equity. So Harry.
So, hello, thanks. Thank you for inviting me to be here. Well, growing up in the 1950s and the 1960s, Los Angeles had a much smaller Mexican-American population at that time. The Latino population would grow to a much greater extent in the 80s. So during the 60s, when the Chicano moratorium took place, the majority of Latinos in Los Angeles had been Mexican-Americans. And of course, Mexican-Americans were created at the end of the Mexican-American War. And of course, Mexicans had been here for several thousand years, and the people that emerged to become Mexicans had been here for thousands of years. So being in my generation, and of course with all young people, everything seems to be brand new. And one of the things that was new in my generation was that we were the first television viewing generation, in which we had access to mass media in a way that the previous generation had not. The previous generation had been brutally beaten, harmed, attacked by that particular president of the United States during the attacks on what was known as the Pachucos. Of course, Pachucos were later defined as being gang members, but to be Pachuco meant that you were from El Paso, Texas. So there was a great migration of Mexican Americans from El Paso, Texas in the 40s. They had been influenced by the Mexican Revolution and internationalism. And so when they arrived in Los Angeles, they altered the tone and the tenor of the Mexican Americans who had been here for a long time. And they threatened the authorities by the fact that that established an attitude and a culture and a language of resistance. Many were killed, many were imprisoned, many were silenced, but there were enough to live past that era and to serve as the mentors to the people of my generation. So in my generation, maybe by the time I was an early teen, schools were in collaboration with the police and with the media and the military to convince young Chicano boys to join the military at the age of 17. Everyone was encouraged. They were handed forms to give to their parents, so their parents would give consent for them to join the Marines at the age of 17, all in for the Vietnam War. So many of my friends were killed by the age of 17. And of course, by the age of 18 and 19, the vast majority of my friends had vanished due to the war, in particular because of the antipathy of that current president against Mexican Americans, in which he specifically made certain that every single available Chicano male would get drafted. So this was happening across the country, where vast numbers of people were dying, husbands, brothers, uncles. It became sort of a national issue when sort of the majority population started dying in great numbers. It was a purposeless war to begin with. And of course, there were demonstrations that took place. As I mentioned, the East LA walkouts were to promote positive educational experience. It's kind of hard to explain what it was like, but it was disallowed to speak Spanish in public at the time. Any authority could actually slap you across the face, kick you. The police would respond using lethal force at any given moment at random. They were allowed to shoot into crowds indiscriminately to quiet people down using live ammunition. which they did on various occasions, including the moratorium and other demonstrations. So in a way, basically the statement by majority of society was that there was no value for Chicano life. Of course, we all viewed ourselves quite differently because this was sort of the established media statement. But of course, as I mentioned before, Mexican Americans had been U.S. citizens for 200 years. And all along the way, Mexican Americans had fought in the wars, had shown acts of bravery and heroism. And so during that era of the 60s, nearly all of the adult males were either World War II or Korean War veterans, and everyone had simply assumed that we were US citizens. This was something that met great conflict with the authorities, particularly the right-wing authorities who had been elected. And the police departments primarily drew their population from outside populations that were designed specifically to control the minority populations. So being a young person in the East LA walkouts meant that it was not only daring, it was could have been life-threatening. And the Chicano moratorium was actually a celebration by the community because tens of thousands of people arrived from all across the country to support the Chicanos in their effort to end the war. No one had any weapons. No one presented any violence. People took their entire families, from the infants all the way to the grandparents. And in the end, everyone was attacked brutally by the police using militarized weapons, including poison gases and other electronic shock devices, and causing great harm to everyone from the age of 1 to the age of 90. Mm. So that's my introduction. And so maybe I could ask a question of Oscar and Arlene. So you're living in a time of great conflict, but it's also a time of opportunity for great creativity. You know, we have this incredible moment where we have a pandemic, and yet we also have the threat of the imposition of a fascist order in this country. And yet I see young people whenever I go out, and I've been teaching for many years, and I know that people are capable of great acts of creativity and intellectual pursuits. So maybe I can hear from either one of you and what you've been doing during this period of time. So maybe we'll start with, how about you, Arlene?
Sure. So yeah, definitely, I think artists are always in this mindset of response, or at least in my personal experience about, we're going through this thing, how do we respond? For me, I've been writing a lot and trying to document my experiences, and just what I'm thinking. But I also founded, like Maravilla said earlier, the Art Hour, which is my organization where we teach young people teaching young people different art forms. So we teach dance, we teach music, theater, visual arts, cinematic arts, storytelling, poetry. And it's just so beautiful to see all of these communities come together. A majority of our students come from East LA and Stockholm, and from the Philippines and Idaho. They're just all over the place, which is so awesome. And they actually inspire me, and I'm still a young person too, to hear these 6 and 7-year-olds, you know, I'll give them a prompt. And we just had a class on the census, and we learned about the census, and we drew some pictures, and I said, well, what does your community look like when everybody counts, when everybody matters, when everybody is valued? And their answers were, there's a communal treehouse where we all play and we can all bring our pets inside. Or When everybody counts, we pay our neighbors' bills. But the reoccurring idea was, when everybody counts, when everybody's valued in our communities, there's love and there's knowledge and there's just a wealth of everything being shared. And so, for me, to hear that from 6 and 7-year-olds and 8-year-olds, I was like, well, I can't be a cynic, a pessimist. I can't be like, the world is awful and it's never going to change. It starts with us. So that's what I've been doing. How about you, Oscar?
Thank you, Arlene, for sharing that. I'm always just admired by all that presence and support that you give to all the generations during these times. So thank you for that. So for me personally, I've had the privilege during this time to be organizing with the Invest in Youth Coalition here in Los Angeles. Our initiative, our goal is to create a youth development department in our city of Los Angeles with the goal of holding our city accountable and to make sure that our city is investing in youth. And specifically during these times, right, we know that youth are not being invested as much when it comes to how the budget is allocated in our city. And also with COVID affecting the families and affecting youth of color and their experiences and their upbringings, especially during this time, we know that we need this huge push to demand that our city funds a youth development department that can further support the youth. And at the same time, make sure that the youth are at the center, with the youth voice, youth ideas, youth experiences, youth language is at the center of this movement and the center of how we change our city and how we change how we fund the issues that are affecting our communities. So for me, I've had the privilege to be part of this community, this coalition that started in East Los Angeles, Pearl Heights. And so I've been having the privilege of working with other youth organizers, other community leaders, other artists, including the organization Self-Help Graphics and Art. So that's the privilege I've been doing. And for me, it's just, it's a privilege that just to be around all these community leaders who want to change our city and want to create progress. And at the same time, make sure that all the youth in our city are uniting to think about how we can reimagine our city and how we can start finding ways to bring our communities together and heal.
So it seems with both of you that the process of working with other young people and to generate community and to generate new works is not only is it self-affirming, but it actually gives everyone not only a sense of purpose, but a sense of future, and which is contrary to much of the negative information that we receive from the media to make us feel helpless. And this is rather empowering. And so you find yourselves both being as mentors, but at the same time, as Arlene, as you mentioned, you're inspired by the people who are your mentees, people who are following you, because of course you recognize that we're all born with that spark of creativity and it just needs to be encouraged. But quite often that's the first thing that's cut, that's the first thing that's harmed. Because if you have people who are self-aware and capable of teaching themselves, in fact, the name of this organization is Self-Help. The idea of helping yourself means that you yourself can be very strong and you recognize the strength in community. So maybe if you could talk a little bit about just your understanding of why community might be important. Either one of you. How about it, Oscar? We'll have you continue on that. Okay.
So for me, a sense of community really comes down to practices, right? How we practice community, how we see each other, how we respect each other, and how we understand each other. Me growing up, I had the privilege of being part of the El Salvador Corridor community campaign. So I was able to interact with a lot of individuals in my community and understand their experiences, listen to their experiences, and be in spaces that were intergenerational. And so for me, that was a sense of community, being able to listen to people from all ages, from all backgrounds, from all experiences, and at the same time, be able to also be part of the conversation. I think that was a great kind of experience for me in the space that I was in, the community space that I was in, is that the older folks always encouraged me to speak up and always encouraged me to take up space. And so I was really, that really shaped who I am today. And so for me, having that community support is really essential. And just having that sense of unity and sense of that you belong to a community, that you're part of it, and that you also have a sense of ownership in the community.
And how about you, Arlene? How would you respond to this?
Yeah, so Oscar and I are both Mexican Salvadorans, Americans. So for me, navigating my identity was something that was so complex because you always had to pick one. You always had to pick a side. You were American, you were Mexican, you're Salvadoreño, you know, you pick one and you couldn't exist as all three. But in my community, I was just, you know, I was just myself. We were always sharing everything. We're always at each other's houses eating dinner, always, you know, doors open and unlocked, which was probably, you know, horrible today. But we were just going in and out of each other's backyards and everything. And I remember when I was in elementary school, I couldn't afford to go to art classes because they were very expensive and we would get them once a month. And my art teacher came up to me and was like, "We got you a scholarship. You got a scholarship to go to this art camp." And so I was like, "Oh my God, that's awesome." And so that was when I was in third grade. And now here I am, a senior in high school. And my mom tells me that my scholarship was my art teacher paying my way through the camp. So for me, community it's never been a question. It's always been people who make room for me at the table and people who empower me and, you know, inspire me and support me. And so therefore, you know, it's our duty to also support them and to support others and uplift our communities in any way that we possibly can.
And so now that we're confined due to COVID-19 restrictions, pandemic restrictions, everyone is reliant on the internet and various forms of media. And those people who are able to adapt effectively and efficiently and resiliently are able to actually have sort of an equal platform by which to communicate with people. This previously did not exist, where you can have the screen and have an audience. And so I find that it's kind of very empowering to be able to communicate in this fashion in which you then have a voice not only in the virtual community, you're able to kind of spread your experiences. You're not restricted by space or time, and particularly if it's saved on sort of a server somewhere where people can view it, it persists, and which is much different from my generation, where so many stories were lost. In fact, recently when the Chicano moratorium coverage took place, one of the things that was very evident was that many of the people that I used to spend time with and many people that worked, so many, I would have to say a vast majority of the people never survived the following 50 years. So there's just a handful of people that are kind of capable of discussing the issue as survivors, but those that have are completely committed, and it's and now, you know, here you are, you're still in high school, and your whole life might be documented and available for everyone to view for the rest of the time. And so all of a sudden this puts a different kind of status for both you and Oscar in terms of the kinds of roles you can play and sort of the significance, and everyone can actually watch your development as you grow into various stages of your artistry and your professionalism. So I don't know, what does it feel like to be able to constantly be, you know, on view? Oscar.
It's definitely a privilege, right? Just because our generation has that access to technology. But for me personally, it's also a challenge as well, because it further tests you as a human to to be authentic and to also understand how you relate to the world and relate to others. So I definitely think that there are also pros and cons, but definitely has empowered our generation to express themselves creatively, express their narratives, express their feelings, their emotions, and to connect with others that can help them build community and build kind of that sense of that we're part of a humanity, right? That we're part of something bigger. And that we're not just stuck in our homes, right? And stuck on our computers or tablets, that we have a sense of connecting with others around us. And so for me, that's what the technology has been able to do.
So, and, you know, there's kind of a performative aspect of all this. So again, from my generation, there were a handful of people that were actually able to penetrate mass media. So they would have been people like Oscar Zeta Costa, and of course, Ruben Salazar. There was actually a world famous actor who actually supported the Chicano movement, and that was Anthony Quinn, an Academy Award winner, and many Mexican actors, and as well as Hollywood actors, were present at many of the events. And now with this new media, it's more democratizing, and anyone with a phone and the technological know-how and the right apps can actually become a contributor to culture, to society, and one can actually really develop this into something of international attention, which if left up to the mainstream media, such as Hollywood only perpetuates negative stereotypes, which is completely harmful and actually designed to be harmful. But this, we're able to create our own work and present it raw, unfiltered, so that other people will understand and humanize who we are. So Arlene, maybe you have feelings about that element of that.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's so bizarre now with like the internet and social media and YouTube, even what we're on right now. But it's very empowering to have the ability to create your own narrative and have the tools to do that, and to be able to perpetuate a new narrative instead of, you know, what we see on the news or in the media, which is really exciting because, you know, growing up, we would watch Telemundo and it was whatever we got from Telemundo. But now it's whatever, you know, whatever avenues and channels we can access, and then whatever we want to put out, whatever image of ourselves. I don't know. I think it's a cool time to be alive. At least that's what I'll say.
Yeah. How about you, Oscar? What do you think about that? The whole democratization of the media.
No, yeah, I definitely think that the technologies that we have access to now definitely has given the power for the public and the audience to decide what they want to watch and what they want to be influenced by. And again, those are the pros and cons to that. But at the end of the day, I think the beautiful thing about that is that, again, it democratizes this understanding that everyone has a choice to decide what they want to watch and what they want to be influenced and what they want to connect with. So I think has definitely empowered the public and the whole globe and trying to connect with other spaces and other people that they probably would have never connected in previous generations or with previous technologies. But yeah.
So, I mean, it's absolutely evident that the two of you are highly motivated to continue with your education, and, you know, you recognize your own self-awareness, and of course, not everyone has that attitude. And so it becomes quite obvious at other points that it's always going to be some people who are going to be the teachers, some people who are going to be those that influence culture. It's always going to be someone who's going to create with the understanding that the idea is to encourage others for self-improvement and kind of a way of telling the world that not only do you exist, but that you have something to contribute. And so rather than having others explain things about you, so for instance, if we were to watch the news channels on the weekend, if there's anything at all pertains to Latinos, it's never a Latino that will describe what's going on. It's someone else who will be the definer. And if you watch any Hollywood film, and even if there's no Latinos at all, there will always be a disparaging remark in some level or another that will disparage Latinos. And of course, if you continue to have the president that we have, well, he's of course was elected based on outward and absolute hatred of Mexicans. And so this kind of negative attacks, one way, of course, is to vote someone out of office, but it requires a lot more for people to combat negative stereotypes by providing positive examples. And this is to show people who are young and wonderful and doing things and making things and working with ideas, complex ideas, and with sort of the addition of having sort of some level of Latino attitude to it, which everyone else will miss if you are reliant on mass media. So in a way, anything you do actually that's positive kind of contributes in dispelling negative stereotypes. And so, and I'm not sure if you've ever felt the effects of negative stereotypes, either one of you, I wonder. What would you say, Arlene, maybe anything ever affect you where maybe people had different expectations because they saw something on TV or read it somewhere and you wound up proving them wrong, maybe?
Yeah, so I'm actually an English language learner. And that's something that just recently actually was held over my head in my English class. A year ago, my teacher was like, yeah, you didn't pass this paper because of your background. And I was like, okay, what does this mean? And then this year I passed my first paper, flying colors. And my teacher wrote, you have the best handle of the English language in your class. And so I was shocked to be first. I was like, see, I can write. It's nothing against me. But just to have this stereotype that I'll never fit in. I'll never have a grasp over this language that's not mine, or over a subject, I guess that's not really mine. We get taught so many Eurocentric ideas and Eurocentric stories, which can sometimes be disheartening. And sometimes, it really forces us to examine, well, what is really our role in society when we have all of these stories being told that are not ours? Is it to, take a step back and be like, okay, these stories are not mine, but what can I learn from them? Or is it for us, to be change makers in our communities and demand that our stories be told too, because they're just as important and just as valid. And I also find that being a young artist, at least for this past couple of years, that I've been an artist with a capital A and taking studio classes, that a lot of people expect work to be about your culture, which I think a lot of my stuff does stem from that. And for other artists, that's what they draw inspiration from. But we do get pigeonholed into this box that, oh, you're Mexican, oh, you're Latino, you have to only tell this certain story. And it doesn't really give us the space to dream and the space to explore whatever we want to. So finding new ways to navigate that, and also, the Eurocentricity of the art world. And so I've definitely felt some of those stereotypes, but we're learning to grow past them.
And some of those stereotypes are based on the ignorance of those that are being prejudiced, because of course, if you look at the history of Mexico, Central America, South America, have very advanced art that is not only goes to pre-Hispanic art, but since that time, very international and very, not all art is directly linked to the culture, but what all artists do, and that is to explore their creativity and where their mind might take them. And so, you know, you'll have great influences, and so for people to expect to, in my generation, it was expected that everyone were going to do only certain kind of work also. And of course, and you know, who should be the gatekeepers preventing you from expressing yourself in any form that you want. And so, and again, it's one of the reasons I'm pretty much in favor of the new media is that we get to hear you, and we now get to hear Oscar. And what do you think, Oscar?
No, yeah. When it comes to the stereotypes and how the system treats us since the moment we're born in this country, for me personally, it has to do also with same with Arlene, with language. When we were taught this European colonial language, right? There was always this kind of sense of I have to fit a certain way of speaking, right? And so definitely teachers, especially during high school, definitely made that aware to me that I would speak a certain way, mostly because I grew up in a household that was bilingual, and so I would sometimes mix words with Spanish or pronounce words English with the like kind of Spanish kind of accent. And so for me, it was definitely that was definitely something prevalent during my high school years, made by the teachers. Again, enforcing that language kind of assimilation. And so that for me personally, that was what I grew up with. And then also not only that, but also the pressure in the education system as you go up in higher education to also fit that status, right? That assimilation status, and also pressure by even our own communities, right? People around us who want to fit that status and see you different because you don't want to fit that status. And I choose not to fit that status. And for me, that's my experience when it comes to stereotypes. But definitely is something that we definitely have to start breaking down, dismantling, and start expressing our own ways freely, connected to our roots, connected to who we truly are. And so, yeah, that's how I feel about that.
And so, you know, you travel anywhere in the world outside of the United States, and it's very common to find people being multilingual, necessary and just something that's expected, and it's incorporated into the education. Of course, the United States is very isolationist, and it all has to do with the 2 world wars that took place in the 20th century. And as it turns out, of course, English is not spoken rather effectively here anyway, but it turns out, of course, that English is the language that is the language of money across the world. So it is super important to be in absolute control of the English language, but that should not preclude people from learning other languages. And so, Arlene, you mentioned people from Stockholm, and I've actually been in Sweden, and I know that there almost everyone speaks English, and it's very difficult to say 1 or 2 words in Swedish, but you go to the next country over, Denmark, and they will speak very similarly in multilingual languages. And then you travel around all over Europe, and when you get to Mexico City, you'll find everyone there also from everywhere around the world. And you get to Los Angeles, and it's not actually a secret, but there are more than 100 languages spoken in Los Angeles, and the system does not accommodate everyone. And it actually doesn't accommodate even the original language that was brought here. And of course, Spanish too is a colonial language. And so the idea of languages being used as a weapon against people, one has to understand that it's important to be in control of the language that will empower you to succeed. But it is also important to have some handle on maybe other languages, so this way you can broaden your conversation with people, and of course even bringing in some of the new technology makes it a bit easier too. And so this idea of being left out, I think I mentioned before, my generation, people that were influenced by the Chicanos from El Paso, we actually, the earliest language I spoke was Calo, C-A-L-O, which was part of the resistance dialect that was developed in the Mexican Revolution and fostered in the Chicano barrios of El Paso and then brought over to Los Angeles, which is now very commonplace in some neighborhoods, still prevalent and very difficult to decode. And so sometimes language can be used as a defense, but quite often the English language is used to offend. And so one has to be in firm control of the language so that you can actually fight back verbally, intellectually. And so, and Arlene, you mentioned that you're a poet. So for someone who was told by a teacher who didn't seem to be too sensitive, and you still write poetry, so maybe you could tell us how your focus on language has been sort of a pathway into self-discovery.
Yeah, definitely. I don't know. I think poetry is a weapon. I think poetry is a tool for healing. I think poetry is magic. Yeah, I just remember getting that comment and going home to my mom and being like, this teacher told me this thing, that I failed because I'm an English language learner. And then I went home and she was like, just, brush it off, shake it off. That's kind of been my mom's thing. Shake it off. Anytime anything happens, shake it off. So I did. And I went to my room and I wrote. And I remember like one of the first poems that I ever wrote, I was very into slam. That was the time in 8th grade. I was like, yeah, slam is how you get it all out, slam poetry. And I had written about this teacher who refused to teach this chapter in our textbook that said Mexican contributions to America. And she said, we're going to skip this one. It's not important. And it was 2 pages long. And I said, well, it's really short. What do you mean it's not important? And she goes, the information in here is not good. And so I said, okay, well, let me do a presentation on it. And then I can present that to the class and you can vet all the information and make sure it's good. And so, after she had told me all of that, I went home and I was, writing all these things, like imagery about biting my tongue and like swallowing silence and all these things. And I look back on it now and I laugh. But for me, that was my tool of empowerment. That was my tool of healing. And now I'm not so hot in the slam scene, but I do still write, and it's still a tool that I use because it helps me reclaim my narrative, and it helps me define who I want to be before anybody else can do it for me. So I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, well, it's actually, very brilliant approach to dealing with adversity and actually not so subtle hatred you had to confront, and how you overcome it by self-love, actually, by empowering yourself. So, and Oscar, maybe you went through a UC campus, and I've taught at 5 Southern UC schools. So I was at your campus, and there, in order to even be at a UC school, you definitely have to be in command of the language, and of course you're vetted for many other traits. And when you arrive there, you'll find people that have lived absolutely privileged lives, particularly UC Santa Barbara. And so arriving there must have been kind of a interesting cultural shock, and yet a challenge that you obviously overcame. So, which is rather heroic also, I'm sure. And I'd like to hear about that.
Yeah, that definitely was a culture shock for me, going to UC Santa Barbara. Definitely, the privilege is definitely prevalent, not only in the school, but also in Santa Barbara itself. So that was a wonder for me, just to understand that kind of change from the communities I came from. For me personally, the way I went about it was I had this sense of understanding that I wanted to take whatever I learned back into my communities. And so for me, the way I would do that is to put myself in spaces that represented who I am and represented what I wanted to do with my life. So in order to navigate that kind of culture, that kind of those dynamics at UC Santa Barbara. I put myself in spaces like the UC, the Multicultural Center, the AS Food Bank, Hermanos Unidos, UCSB First, which was a philanthropy club. So those spaces really provided that kind of sense of community and connection to my communities here in Los Angeles. And that was how I was able to navigate the system and that culture, and just be with folks that that understood where I came from, respected me, saw me as human, but also reflected and respected my cultural background and why I was there. And so yeah, for me, that was the way I went about the UC system for sure. But I definitely think it was a learning experience, just being able to get that culture shock and understand the socioeconomic dynamics of our country and in our state, because it definitely motivated me even more to kind of challenge that and to change that, especially for our communities.
So, you know, we've never actually met previous to today, but one of the things, again, that's quite evident, and for both of you, and you're both in different levels of your education. Arlene, you're in the 12th grade, and Oscar, you've graduated with your BA. What's really necessary is to recognize that you must actually engage and complete all the work. You need to be self-motivated. You need to study. You need to read every day. You need to write every day. You need to talk to people every day. You need to build your skill set. You need to know all about the newest technologies that are within your financial capabilities, and of course, maintain and have a growing community of people that you can consult with and actually influence, and also to be attached to certain beliefs that you can advocate on behalf. All of this kind of situates you in a position of individual power and cultural power by influencing and pushing up against all the forces that would very much like to have us all go away. And of course, this is evident at this point in time. We have a very large segment of the population that actively would like us to go away, and then another group that doesn't say very much, but they're certainly not defending us. So for instance, there's only one set of group of children who are in cages right now, and they're Latino. And it's not a top subject matter. If any other group of children were placed into cages, it would cause a global uproar. But with Latino children and physically in cages, not even, if you put a dog in a cage like that, you'd be put in prison. And so, you know, it's the silence and the lack of support makes it quite evident that people are very much either concede to that or are in favor of that, which then kind of gives a clear parameters of what we're working through. And that is an environment that's harsh, but one that can be overcome, and can be overcome by making sure that the largest number of people you know and everyone knows becomes educated, becomes activated, and in some way or another expresses their creativity, and most importantly, announces their humanness to others. And this way you will not be referred to in sort of a very flat, stereotypic manner. It just won't fit. So, I'm just wondering if you kind of both feel that, you know, coming to terms with recognizing your ability to communicate, that there's kind of a social responsibility, and of course it can't take up all your time, but you know how to allocate some time to contribute to others while you're actually building yourselves up. So it's important to be the strongest and most educated person, but that's the idea to tell other people too. So I mean, what does it feel like to be young and smart? Arlene.
Yeah, that made me laugh. What does it feel like to be young and smart?
Well, it's true. It's true.
It feels good, but it feels tiring sometimes. I feel the need to uplift my community is intrinsic. it's what I was born to do. That's what I believe. That's what my family believes. And sometimes it's hard because, you know, I'll have mentors or teachers who love this saying, love this. You have to put on your oxygen mask before you can put on anybody else's oxygen mask, right? When the plane is going down, if you don't have your oxygen mask on first, you can't help the young children or the other people in the plane. So I really grapple with that idea of how do I help myself? How do I put on my oxygen mask? But you know, I have another hand. So how do I put on somebody else's oxygen mask? And I think it's all about balance. I think it's about understanding what are your strengths and maybe even what are your weaknesses and where are the places that you can step back or uplift somebody else to maybe take hold of that project or that thing. And then where are the places where you can step in, where you're at an area of expertise. Like I think people think I'm a great speaker, but I am not a great communicator on social media. So that's where I'll call a friend or a family member and I'll be like, hey, I have this opportunity, you know, I need help with this. Would you mind helping me? And that's really where our community steps back in, right? To help us and to uplift us. So grappling again with this idea. I have two hands. How can I put on both oxygen masks? What about you, Oscar? What do you think?
I'm totally with you on that. Yes, the sense of exhaustion, mental exhaustion, emotional exhaustion, but also that sense of balance, right? That's how you cope with it. That's how you check yourself. And that's also how you love yourself as well, is trying to create that balance. But at the end of the day, for me, it's something that motivates me every single day. Just having the social responsibility to create change and to also just create space for others and really just get into conversation, kind of express yourself in the best way possible, but establish those relationships and push that communication. But for me, it's just something that I'm very that's been instilled in me, like you in your case with your family, in my case as well. Since I was a younger person, family has always been instilling great values in me and been a great role model. And also people in my community. Just every day I walk out of my community, I'm very blessed to see all these people, especially during these times, right, that are resisting and at the same time providing for their families and also keeping our society afloat, right? And so for me, it's just a consistent reminder of my duty, my responsibility, and what motivates me. But at the same time, just balancing that out with my own needs and not getting burnt out, right? Avoiding burnout, especially with social media, but avoiding that and trying to focusing on establishing those relationships in my community.
We're at 8:15, and so I want to give some room for any questions. But before that, I wanted to point out something that Harry mentioned at the very beginning, which I find really interesting, that he's mentioned about his generation being the TV generation and the effects that happened. And right now we're living in the social media, phoned generation, and the boom, a similar boom, but at a faster rate. And so there's no doubt that the comparison of this technology and what the images and the stories that have been sent out to the world, the difference is the less censorship opportunities with the handheld device. Although we are being, there is a threat for censorship all the time, consistently. I do want to talk about or mention also the democratization of the internet. And unfortunately, not everyone, and I think right now this pandemic, I highlighted that that's not actually democratized. There are still a lot of people who don't have internet access. So how do we give voice to them? How do we elevate their concerns? With that said, Alexa, are there any questions posted on YouTube or maybe Facebook? I'm not sure right now.
No questions have come through yet.
Okay, I have a question for you, Harry. What are the similarities and differences between the spirits of the movements back in the 70s and today?
Well, again, in the 60s, there was sort of a very imminent threat that all the young men were going to get killed in the Vietnam War. And if you didn't sign up for the war, they would hunt you down. I had many friends who were literally dragged off the streets. And a few weeks later, I'd have to go to a funeral home and attend their funerals. They were not willing to go. And at this point, we have sort of young people who are now confined and confronted with a pandemic, but also economic collapse. And of course, as we know, Latinos are bearing the brunt, African-American community too, are bearing the brunt of the pandemic, but also, widely affected by cuts in pay, loss of jobs, loss of support, the increase in ICE raids, and the militarization of the police, and sort of the endless kinds of threats, and in fact, many of the kinds of things that we see now, the kinds of atrocities that we see now, like for instance, I believe someone was shot in the back by a police officer 6 times. That actually, if you were in war, would be considered a war crime. And similar to using tear gas in any of the demonstrations, well, tear gas is disallowed in war because it actually emanated from the poison gas that was developed in World War I. And so many of the different technologies that are used in domestic fronts actually violate the Geneva Convention and violate the International Declaration of Human Rights, the Declaration of Women's Rights, and the Declaration of Children's Rights. And so, of which, of course, the United States has not signed on to. And so we live in an environment that's it's very much the Wild West in a big way. And we have to understand that certain kinds of conflict might not turn out well for you, and what will turn out the best for you. And of course, what will turn out the best for the vast majority of people is to become absolutely educated, self-educate, read, write, listen, talk to people, learn how to communicate. And for those that don't have access to internet, to build communities so that, again, maybe you can support 1 or 2 young people to have at least a month or 2 of internet connection and some kind of device. You can buy a small tablet for inexpensive, and this way people are not left in the digital divide, as it were, to fall in the cracks. And so, as I mentioned, I've taught for many, many years, but I come from an environment and a place where it's still surprising to me. I do this for a living because, and again, in my generation, so many people were harmed, became very tired early on, and actually didn't live very long because it was so harsh. And so my concern always is to make sure that younger people do not have to undergo such hardship. And the best way to start with that is to recognize your self-worth and to actually increase your value in society by building your skills and letting everyone know that you are here and that it's very important that you are here and that you remain here.
I think Oscar and Arlene are great examples of that.
Absolutely.
And Oscar and Arlene, what do you feel is not being addressed or discussed in these the current conversations that are happening? What do you think is being left out? Either one can answer.
I can answer that first. I think we still have a huge stigmatism around mental health and thinking about how that affects us, especially in a movement. We're always in this go, 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 go mindset. And while that, it's super important and super prevalent, there's always time for rest, and there's always time to utilize our communities in that way. Maybe I need the night off. Maybe I can't finish this thing on this short deadline. And reaching out to people and letting them know that. And also, racial battle fatigue is real. To have to keep, fighting for yourself and asserting your worth and asserting that this conversation is important, whether that be in your institution, in your place of work, even just functioning in the world is very tiring. And so, to acknowledge that. And sometimes it's even as simple as, I see you and I hear you, and it's okay to rest. I think we don't hear that enough, that it's okay to take a break and to take care of ourselves. And, taking care of ourselves looks different to everybody, but that it's okay to rest, I think, is something that we're not addressing too often.
Thank you. So because we have 5 minutes left, I'm going to ask all of you, or end with 2 questions, sorry. First is for Harry. So based on your experience and the transformations in our country, but also witnessing that many things haven't changed, what would you tell your 17-year-old self?
It is possible to have fun your entire life. It could even become even more fun as you go on. The fun somehow has to be integrated into your work ethic of being creative, and just understanding that it's a lifelong endeavor to improve your capacity for intellectual endeavors, and it's important to create works, either intellectual works, creative works, social works, and to establish a network of people that you know and trust, to carry on some of your ideas. And it's also really important to understand that it's important to be peaceful, actually, and to not engage in any form of violence. And so we live in very dangerous times. It doesn't mean we have to respond in such a manner.
And I'll ask both of you, Arlene and Oscar, to answer this question, and we'll start with Oscar this time. So when we're young, adults tend to speak for us, and this also happens as adults, so just be wary. So we're thinking about the systemic and institutional racism and thinking about your future. Please share what it is that you need to believe that that you're given to what it is that you need to be given the equal opportunities to be able to succeed.
I think, oh wow, that's a question like just incorporates everything what I'm going through right now. So, but I think for me, it's just this kind of sense of community, just that I belong to something that's bigger than myself. That constant reminder that we not only are the human race, but we're also part of a planet, right? We're part of a universe, and so that sense of connection, I think for me is something very important, and it looks different in many ways. So I'm very open to just like discovering all those ways. But for me, it's just having that sense of connection, sense of balance, of peace, and at the same time that I'm contributing to something bigger than myself, and that someone's supporting me, and I have a community that's supporting me in developing that and unfolding that from different backgrounds, different ages.
And Arlene?
Yeah, the point of being talked over is very prevalent, especially in all the work that we're doing as youth. So I guess what I need to say would be make space for me at the table. I have my own folding chair. So when you're doing youth-based work or doing any type of work, really, listen to the youth. We have a lot to say. we're smart and we're observant and we bring new perspectives to the table.
Well, I started the evening very flustered. As you saw, I couldn't even make an introduction, but I'm leaving tonight very inspired by all of you. And I think that one of the things that we need to also think about is how can not only we work as a community and multiple communities of color, but also through different generations, and to be able to learn from each other, to be able to move forward and hopefully to a very more optimistic space and place. I want to thank each and every one of you again for your patience and for joining us tonight. Thank you everyone this evening for participating in this YouTube conversation in the studio. And we will have an extra Artist Lab studio next week on Thursday at 7 o'clock, hopefully at 7 o'clock. Thank you again and good night.